There's a room in the gatehouse at Kenilworth Castle where something happens that is truly terrifying, and it's been witnessed by more than one person. This weekend I visited the castle to have a look for myself. So stick around until the end to find out what that thing is. You won't be disappointed. This is the haunting of Kenilworth Castle. So this weekend I headed to Kenilworth in Warwickshire to visit the ruins of a castle that was once voted the second most haunted heritage site in all of England. I did a fair bit of filming while I was walking around the castle, so I'll play most of my footage whilst I'm talking about the history. Honestly, some of the views were incredible. This place has seen sieges, royal breakups, and one very over-the-top party for Queen Elizabeth I. So Kenilworth Castle sits right in the heart of the town of Kenilworth in Warwickshire. And even though a lot of it's in ruins today, due to a process called slighting, it's still seriously impressive. If you don't know what slighting is, much like I didn't, it involves the partial destruction of the castle. In this particular case, by parliamentary forces in 1649 to prevent it from being used as a military stronghold after the English Civil War. Kenilworth illustrates 5 centuries of English military and civil architecture. The castle is built almost entirely from locally sourced new red sandstone. English Heritage looks after it now, and honestly, it's one of the most atmospheric castles you can visit. It was originally built not long after the Norman conquest. We're talking late 11th, early 12th century, and it kept evolving right through the Tudor period. So what you're seeing today when you visit is basically centuries of English history laid into one big dramatic ruin. Architectural experts call it one of the best surviving examples of a semi-royal palace from the late Middle Ages, partly because it was massive, partly because of the detail in the stonework, and partly because of the sheer drama it's witnessed over the years. For starters, in 1266 it was the site of the longest siege in medieval English history. 6 whole months. That's a long time to be lobbing rocks at a wall, right? The place was so well defended with water defences and thick walls that even after months of attacks, it didn't fall easily. It's also tied up with all kinds of major events in English history. During the Wars of the Roses, it was used as a Lancastrian base. Edward II was deposed here, proper Game of Thrones energy. And in 1414, King Henry V was sent a gift of tennis balls. Yep, tennis balls. Meant as an insult by the French. Like, why don't you go and play some games instead of trying to be a warrior? Obviously he didn't take it well, and he launched the campaign that led to the Battle of Agincourt. So, bad move from the French there. But maybe the most famous chapter in Kenilworth's story is the one of Robert Dudley and Queen Elizabeth I, and that's the period I'm going to focus on in this episode. But before we go any further, I need to ask you to take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and tickle that little bell icon so you don't miss future episodes. And also because it helps me with the YouTube algorithm gods. Also, if you don't like and subscribe, the White Lady of Kenilworth Castle will sneak into your house while you're asleep tonight and tie all of your shoelaces together in double knots. No, in triple knots. So make sure you do it. She's watching you. Right, so you might have heard the name Robert Dudley before, especially if, like me, you're into all things Tudor. He was Queen Elizabeth I's favourite, and I don't mean she just liked his beard, I mean favourite. The two of them were inseparable, dancing, riding, whispering in corners of the palace, and everyone was talking about it. But here's the thing, were they actually lovers? It's one of the big Tudor mysteries. Elizabeth swore on her deathbed that nothing unseemly ever happened between them. And honestly, there's no concrete evidence to prove otherwise, just a lot of gossip. My guess is that there would have been some kind of hanky-panky involved from time to time, but I don't want to be the one to spread vicious rumours. It got really messy when you throw Dudley's wife into the mix, a woman named Amy Robsart. Now Dudley had married Amy when they were both teenagers. It was a bit of a whirlwind romance, probably more about passion than politics. But as he climbed the royal ladder and became Elizabeth's golden boy, Amy was left behind, living a quiet, lonely life at various country houses. She never really appeared at courts, and that just made the whispers louder. People said Elizabeth was waiting for Amy to die so she could marry Dudley. And then, one day, Amy did die. On the 8th of September 1560, she was found dead at the bottom of a staircase at Cumnor Place, with a broken neck. Most of the household staff were out at the local fair in Abingdon that day. The whole thing was suspicious as hell. Of course, people started asking questions. Had Dudley killed her? Had Elizabeth known? Had they planned it together? A jury ruled it an accident, but nobody believed it. The Queen was absolutely horrified by the rumours, and any talk of her marrying Dudley pretty much ended there. The scandal stuck like glue, but Amy's story doesn't end there, not even close. Locals at Cumnor were convinced she'd been murdered, and they said her ghost began haunting the house and grounds almost immediately. Tenant farmers who occupied Cumnor Place in the early 1700s started to report a barrage of paranormal activity. Blood-curdling screams were heard in the night. Candles would extinguish all at the same time, with no external source. Strange light anomalies were also spotted throughout the building. It got so bad in fact that 9 clergymen were brought in from Oxford to perform an exorcism. Apparently they trapped her spirit in a local pond, which came to be known as Madam Dudley's Pond. Weirdly, the pond was said to never freeze over, no matter how cold it got. A sign, people said, that her ghost was still trapped in the water. But haunting a pond wasn't enough. Over the years, people kept reporting sightings of Amy's ghost, drifting through the ruins, appearing by the old walls of Cumnor Place, and even scaring off dancers at village parties. One 18th century poet even wrote that the village girls wouldn't dance near the hall for fear of seeing Amy's ghost. Now you might be thinking, but this is a video about Kenilworth Castle, so why are we talking about Amy's ghost at Cumnor Place? Well, Cumnor Place was demolished in 1810, so wouldn't Amy's ghost simply haunt the land where she met her untimely end? Maybe, if her spirit was a residual energy, yes. But what if Amy's spirit had unfinished business? What if she resented Robert and his life with Elizabeth? What if Amy's spirit moved on to somewhere else? So you might think that with Amy out of the picture, Robert Dudley would finally be free to marry Elizabeth, right? Well, technically yes, but realistically, not a chance. The scandal surrounding Amy's death had poisoned the well, so to speak. Elizabeth knew that marrying Dudley might have sparked outrage, maybe even cost her the throne. The crown was already a fragile thing for a woman in power, and adding a possibly murderous husband to the mix. Yeah, not the best political move. But here's the wild part. Even though she couldn't marry him, she wouldn't let him go either. She literally told the French ambassador, "I cannot do without my Lord Robert, for he is like my little dog." Ouch, and yet Dudley seemed totally fine with being her loyal lapdog. She kept him close, calling him Bonnie Sweet Robin, showering him with gifts, titles and power. In 1563, just 3 short years after poor Amy's untimely demise, Queen Elizabeth gifted Robert Kenilworth Castle and made him Earl of Leicester just a year later. So now we start to understand why Amy's ghost might have felt the need to follow Robert to Kenilworth. If the stories are true, she hadn't quite finished with him yet. Oh yes, we'll hear more from our Amy later. Anyway, to keep Robert close at hand, Elizabeth came up with the most chaotic idea ever. She wanted Robert to marry Mary Queen of Scots. Yes, Bloody Mary. But only if they both lived with her at court. Imagine being the third wheel in your own marriage. Classic Elizabeth move. Now Dudley, bless him, still hoped he'd get that royal wedding. He even popped the question again around Christmas 1565. But Elizabeth danced around the proposal like she was avoiding hot coals. Dudley got the hump and left court. So what did she do? She ordered him back and basically said, "You are not allowed to leave me again." Romantic? Creepy? You decide. Eventually, Dudley started looking elsewhere. In 1573, he may have secretly married Lady Sheffield, a wealthy and stunning widow. They definitely had a son. Whether it was a legal marriage is still a bit of a mystery. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Dudley kept up their on-again, off-again dynamic, full of bickering, flirting, and theatrical reunions. He even transformed Kenilworth Castle into this insane Tudor theme park, so to speak, just to impress her. Her final visit was in 1575 and it lasted 19 days, the longest she had ever stayed in a courtier's home. There were fireworks loud enough to be heard 20 miles away, banquets, music, masks, the whole deal. And when she complained she couldn't see the fancy new gardens properly from her window, Dudley's team worked all night to build a pop-up garden just for her to see the next morning. Now that is dedication. There was meant to be this grand finale, a mask begging her to marry Dudley. But, in a tragic turn of events, the heavens opened and it literally got rained off. Elizabeth didn't stick around to hear it, she just rode away, and with her, so did Robert's last shot at being her king. Just give up, Robert, some things are never meant to be. Well, 3 years later, in 1578, it seems he finally did give up, because he married Lettice Knollys, Elizabeth's fiery red-haired cousin. Yes, you heard that right, Lettice. I mean, come on, who in their right mind looks at a baby and thinks, now that looks like a lettuce, if I've ever seen one. I wholeheartedly apologise if anyone watching this is called Lettice, but come on, how can that even be a name? Anyway, Robert and Lettice kept their marriage a secret at first, but of course, somebody spilled the beans. Elizabeth was furious. She never forgave Lettice, literally never spoke to her again. But Robert, after a bit of a cold spell, things went back to normal. The two of them just couldn't stay away from each other. Their bond lasted right to the very end. In 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada, Dudley helped organise Elizabeth's famous rally speech to the troops at Tilbury. It was his last big moments. Not long after, he fell seriously ill, which brings us to the creepiest part of the whole story. Nearly 40 years after Amy's death, Dudley was out hunting in Cornbury Park. He became separated from his party and, according to legend, came face to face with Amy's ghost. She told him they'd be together again in 10 days. Can you guess what happened? Yep, 10 days later, on the 4th of September 1588, Robert Dudley died. Coincidence? Prophecy? Well, actually, it's believed that Robert died of stomach cancer, but for the purpose of this video, we can call it one final act of vengeance from beyond the grave. Either way, it's one of the most haunting love triangles in English history. A doomed romance, a suspicious death, a relentless ghost, and the scandal that haunted a queen to her dying day. So is the apparition of a white lady that's been spotted numerous times at Kenilworth Castle the ghost of Amy Robsart? I believe it very well could be. But what about the other ghosts that have been seen roaming the castle grounds? Let's talk about those, shall we? Kenilworth Castle hasn't been named the second most haunted heritage site in England for no reason, you know. Okay, let's start at the stables. The ghost of a stable boy has been spotted at the stables numerous times, along with phantom chickens and a ghostly horse. Perhaps even more bizarre are the reports that the ghost of a little boy has been seen running along the roof of the stables. Whether this is the ghost of the stable boy or a different spirit entirely is unclear, although I'd say running across the stable roof sounds like a rather dangerous thing to do, but I don't suppose that matters all too much to him. There are 3 entities who are said to haunt our next location, the Gatehouse. A soldier dressed all in black. Is a castle even haunted if they don't have a resident ghostly soldier? A young girl who appears to be crying for her daddy, and the apparition of an older lady. Could it be her who rocks the cradle in the upstairs bedroom? Perhaps. A couple visiting the castle last year were approaching the entrance to the gatehouse when they heard the sound of crying. When they entered the gatehouse, the only person present at the time was a volunteer. They asked if the volunteer was okay, to which the volunteer, quite confused, just kinda said, "Yeah, I'm fine." When the couple asked about the crying, the volunteer didn't know what they were talking about, insisting that they were alone in the gatehouse and had heard no such crying. In 2008, a man visiting the castle was stood in the former gatehouse passage when he heard the sound of a girl crying coming from the south room. When the man went to investigate, he saw a young girl in Elizabethan dress standing in the corner of the room. The girl was sobbing uncontrollably, with her face in her hands, calling for her father. The same girl has been seen on numerous occasions in different areas of the gatehouse, including the exhibition room on the second floor, where she's been seen running through the room. A more disturbing apparition is that of a man wearing all black, carrying a sword whilst clutching a wound on his stomach. The apparition has also been witnessed leaning against the fireplace in the south room, with blood pouring from a wound on his head. Could this be the father of the little girl? Let me know what you think. The third entity that's been witnessed in the gatehouse is that of an elderly woman who's been spotted lurking on the first floor. She's described as deathly thin with long scraggly hair as she paces back and forth looking forlorn and lost. A first-person account of this ghost actually comes from a volunteer who was doing their final checks of the day before locking up. They were at the first floor at the top of the stairs when they were overcome with the feeling of being watched. After quickly scanning the area in case there was still a guest on the first floor, the volunteer was surprised to find nobody there. After going up to the second floor for a final check, the volunteer also found nobody there. However, when they returned down to the first floor, they were met with the terrifying sight of the apparition of an elderly lady kneeling down by the bed in the oak room. What happened next is absolutely spine-chilling. As the floorboard creaked under the foot of the volunteer, the old lady slowly turned her head to face them before rising to her feet and floating towards them. With that, the volunteer turned to the stairs and fled, I imagine at the speed of an Olympic sprinter. Understandably, the volunteer refused to ever be alone in the gatehouse again. I can't believe they were ever willing to set foot back in that place. Fuck that, I'd absolutely refuse to go back in there again, whether accompanied by someone else or not. In the Elizabethan gardens, the ghostly apparitions of a couple in modern dress have been spotted near the water fountain. Who they are and why they are bound to the gardens is quite unclear, but they have been seen by volunteers in early evening in summer. In the castle ruins, ghostly apparitions of soldiers have been seen, along with a black mist-like entity who dwells in the cellar of the strong tower. A few years back, an elderly man visited the castle with his grandchildren. One of the children saw an actor dressed as a monk heading down towards the cellar. The child followed after the monk to watch the show. However, when they got down to the cellar, they were met with the horrifying sight of the monk standing in the corner facing the wall, before disappearing into thin air. When I visit these locations, I always like to chat to the staff to find out if anybody had experienced or heard of anybody experiencing anything paranormal. One lady told me that one evening not too long back, they were getting ready to close the castle up after a busy day. That day, there had been actors at the castle performing in costume. The lady I was speaking to said she was standing by the shop when one of her co-workers was standing by the entrance to the castle. To create a mental picture, between the shop and the entrance to the castle grounds is a gravel pathway. Off to the side is a grass verge with a set of steps which lead down to a trail on lower ground. It was getting dark. The lady said she heard her co-worker on the radio saying, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" When she looked up, she could see a lady in an old-fashioned red dress walking along the path. She'd come seemingly from nowhere. She turned and headed down the steps towards the trail. Presuming that maybe it was one of the costume actors, the other lady decided to chase after her to tell her they needed her to make her way to the exit. It was time to close up after all. However, when she reached the bottom of the stairs and looked in both directions, there was nobody there. She said it would have been humanly impossible for anybody to have moved quickly enough to escape view within that amount of time. To make things even more peculiar, the other costume actors, who were all accounted for at the exit, said they didn't have anyone in a costume matching that description. But the most terrifying story, in my opinion, comes from that same lady who said that she was once closing up in the gatehouse, doing her final checks, when she was on the first floor at the top of the stairs. She said she was about to walk down the stairs when she heard a creaking coming from in the oak bedroom. Now this bedroom is quite dark and depressing looking. There's a 4-poster bed with a very old looking wooden crib right in front of it. Now you may have already guessed where I'm going with this story. When the lady looked into the room, she didn't see the ghostly apparition of a lady. No, what she saw was pure nightmare fuel. That crib was rocking from side to side with absolutely nobody around it. I must admit, after hearing this story when I was on that floor, when I peeked into that room, I kinda wanted to see the crib move. But at the same time, if it had moved, I don't think my feet would have touched the stairs on the way back down. So that brings my visit to Kenilworth Castle to an end. Did I see any ghosts? No. But that doesn't mean the place isn't haunted. I absolutely believe it is. The castle is really stunning, and whether you're a paranormal thrill seeker like me, or someone who's fascinated by historic heritage sites, Kenilworth Castle is definitely worth a visit. For more content like this, click this video here, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like this video. Honestly, it really does help me out massively. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.